Embarking on a sequel can be exciting, but it comes with baggage. For the fans, it's another chance to see their favorite characters, experience the repercussions of the events of the first film, see new sights, and watch the players grow beyond what they were. There is the possibility that a sequel will pointlessly retread what came before, that it could end up complicating the ongoing story to the point of ridiculousness, or simply fail to attain the quality of the first or win over everyone with its choices. For the filmmakers, there's the challenge of making a better film with the tools and universe they're pretty knowledgeable about, but there are also limitations, constraints, and unfair obstacles on their side. Expectations will run high. History will tell you there are more bad sequels than good, and you cannot create things entirely out of whole cloth to suit your purposes, as you will be expected to play fair within the rules of the fictional universe, while also making something unique that stands on its own. Welcome to the film that carves its way forward boldly, damn the consequences. The film that determined forever the future of the franchise. The one that took a chance on going darker and expanding beyond the simple adventure feel of the first film. And the one that became the model and shorthand reference for all sequels going forward. Welcome to Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. This film is legendary, almost as important to cinema as its older brother, and is generally more well regarded. It is as groundbreaking as Episode 4, but in different ways, and it saved Star Wars from being a one-film wonder. However fans feel about the franchise now, with seemingly endless sequels and spin-offs of widely varying quality, almost everyone agrees there are at least 2 great films in the series. How ironic then that it was initially as divisive as all those later adventures would be. Critics were quite mixed at the time about whether it was a positive evolution or a backwards step. Some fans were irate enough to stop publishing their fan magazine after drafting an open letter telling people how much they hated the film. It did very well at the box office, though a noticeable step down from its illustrious predecessor. And there was a fair amount of internal studio conflict afterwards, though not related to the public reception of Empire, leading to the departure of several key creative figures and cementing George Lucas's distaste for Hollywood corporations. It may have been the signaling of a dark time for some, but for others, it was the creative shot in the arm this series needed to become something more. The creation of Episode 5 was just as problematic as the development was for Episode 4. Once again, I recommend reading the J.W. Rinsler book for a more detailed look at these events. Lucas had always envisioned the possibility of sequels and fought hard to get those rights when negotiating the original contracts with Fox. He initially started work with Alan Dean Foster on a lower budget sequel which eventually became Splinter of the Mind's Eye. But when the original film was a giant hit, Lucas knew he could do whatever he wanted. He started with concepts left over from the first film's initial drafts and created an outline. However, he was adamant about 2 things. He wasn't going to direct, and he wasn't going to write the script. The first problem had a novel solution. Irvin Kershner was something of an old acquaintance of Lucas's and was impressed with his student film work at USC. While hundreds of directors were considered, Lucas was sure Kershner was the right guy and stoked the man's ego to get him interested. Kershner was promised he would be given directorial freedom to make an even better film than the original, and despite some initial hesitation, signed on in early 1978. The script encountered different problems. The general outline of the film stayed pretty consistent from initial notes to finished product, but Lucas knew it was missing something. He first hired noted film writer and sci-fi author Lee Brackett, who took the outline and created a fleshed-out first draft. But before Lucas could give his feedback, Brackett passed away from cancer. Lucas was forced to write the next draft himself, and considered plenty of ideas. But the turning point came when figuring out how to handle Anakin Skywalker. The film initially had Anakin appearing as a ghost alongside Obi-Wan to help Yoda train Luke, but it was starting to become one character too many. When he thought about merging Anakin with Vader, he realized how perfect the twist was. It deepened the story's thematic weight, it gave Luke a crushing emotional blow, and it simplified the character roster without losing anything substantial. Everything then seemed to flow so naturally in the writing. Whereas the initial film had taken 3 years to write, Lucas's second draft was finished in just 6 weeks, and he was able to do a third draft before he hired Lawrence Kasdan, fresh off Raiders of the Lost Ark. Much is made of Kasdan's writing here, and some of the credit should rightly go to him. But it should be noted that the story is almost entirely Lucas's creation, and what Kasdan did was more akin to a sizable revision rather than creating a brand new script. Once Lucas had a story and a director, he focused his attention on rebuilding ILM, which had pretty much been disbanded after Episode 4, and maintaining his other companies, as well as financing the film using his own money, while Kershner and producer Gary Kurtz focused on making the best film possible. Kershner was a little slower and more methodical in his work than George. Lucas was quite frustrated with this, as Kershner's presentation of the universe seemed to clash with the style established in the original film, and of course, inevitable production problems meant that the budget rose substantially. However, Kurtz could see what was being delivered was spectacular and was shaping to be a fantastic follow-up. The main concern of the production was that nothing got out and would be spoiled to the world. This was such a big concern that the revelation about Darth Vader wasn't actually included in any printed, mass-distributed versions of the script. It was in handwritten drafts that could be more carefully circulated, with the majority of the cast and crew in the dark. The only two actors who knew about it were Mark Hamill and James Earl Jones, and they were not told until they absolutely had to know. Despite the troubled production, Lucas felt confident enough to declare that The Empire Strikes Back wasn't Episode 2, as was thought, but 5, with the first film having a retroactive Episode 4 added during a re-release. Lucas planned for this to be the 5th of potentially 9 or 12 films, and the fans were eager to see what would come next for this saga. What they got was unexpected, to say the least. 3 years after the destruction of the Death Star, the Empire still looms large over the galaxy. Darth Vader is possessed with an obsession to find Luke Skywalker. The rebels have hunkered down on the ice world of Hoth, a hostile environment that they have to constantly battle against. An Imperial probe droid spots the rebel base, which brings Vader's army to Hoth. The rebels stage a desperate ground battle to buy time for their people to flee and succeed only in delaying the Empire briefly. Our heroes split up, with Han and Leia trying to outrun the Empire in a malfunctioning ship, and Luke sneaks off to the swamp planet of Dagobah to find a Jedi Master and learn more about the Force. Luke discovers a small old alien named Yoda who turns out to be the great warrior he thought he was searching for. Yoda expresses reluctance about training Luke due to his age and his emotional immaturity, but agrees nonetheless. Meanwhile, Han and Leia develop a romance and manage to evade the Empire long enough to flee to Cloud City. Unfortunately, a bounty hunter trailing Han has sent their destination to the Empire, and they are captured and tortured. Vader hopes to lure the young Skywalker out of hiding and entice him to join the dark side. Luke is now faced with a critical choice. If he stays, Han and Leia will likely suffer and die, but the hope Luke represents will be secure. If he goes, he will be tested with the same situation his father faced, and his response could seal the fate of the galaxy. The first thing anyone mentions when describing Empire is that it's the dark middle chapter. While it certainly is, that isn't the first thing that comes to my mind when thinking about it. If I had to use some buzzwords or phrases, it would be mature, emotionally fraught, personal, and impactful. The overall story of the rebellion versus the Empire doesn't really move that far forward here. The rebellion is still the smaller faction, and on the run from the Empire who, despite suffering a major blow with the loss of the Death Star, has lost none of its menacing stature or oppressive taste for violence. What happened in the first film was merely a victory, not an assurance of inevitable triumph. But the film's importance in the saga's story comes from its emotional journey for the main characters. Everyone has changed to some degree by the end, setting the stage for the third film and thus making Empire feel essential. Luke's progression begins with his ordeal on Hoth. Despite being a respected and highly valued member of the Alliance, he's not invincible or immune to horrible tragedies. The Wampa attack is something a fully trained Jedi could have repelled, but Luke nearly dies from the combination of his injuries and the horrible icy fury of the planet. After his rescue and the rebels' subsequent evacuation, he follows Obi-Wan's guidance and goes to Dagobah, which is an equal dose of cold reality to him. It's the furthest thing from glamorance that he might have envisioned upon meeting the great and reclusive warrior. It's ugly, repulsive, and seems worthless. much like the occupant he comes across. Yet both Yoda and the planet have so much to teach the young Luke. Dagobah is teeming with life and a deep connection to the Force. Yoda may be small in stature and seemingly weak in physical ability, but his prowess in the Force and unparalleled wisdom is evident. He shows Luke that with the Force beside him, he is capable of so much more than even he could have imagined. The main obstacle for Luke in this series is his self-doubt. He may have surrendered to the Force last movie, but that was just to guide his hands. He had a small taste of what the Force could do, but he doesn't understand how to work with it. Even lifting rocks is a struggle for him because he thinks you must move it through strength of will. Instead, Yoda demonstrates that the Force is a living entity that should be treated as a companion. It feeds off of the connections of life and grows out of harmony, not domination. When Yoda lifts the X-Wing out of the water, Luke struggles to believe what he just witnessed, and Yoda masterfully points out that's his problem. This isn't a physical act that requires strength. It's more than that. It requires belief. A true Jedi transcends beyond the physical and uses the Force as an ally to become a master of life and death. Luke begins to grow after realizing this, but his training is stunted when he's presented with a significant choice. He sees his friends are in danger via a vision. Yoda knows this and cautions him about leaving now. Going off half-cocked with emotion is incredibly dangerous and threatens to undermine the hope for the galaxy which now rests upon Luke's shoulders. Even if Luke knows that Vader is torturing his friends to get to him, he still believes preserving life at all costs is the right answer. Yet both Yoda and Obi-Wan, seasoned with experience after witnessing the fall of their order, understand that Luke living to fight another day is the key to destroying the Empire. It's not just about his latent Force ability. If it were, other living Force users could take his place like Ahsoka. It's about his connection with Vader. In order to topple the Emperor's regime, the keystone to remove is Anakin, and his children are the best chance at defeating him. If Luke goes now, he could either be killed by Vader for refusing to join him, or be seduced to the dark side, which is just as devastating. Their final hope then would rest in another, and she would have to walk the same path Luke is now. Luke decides to follow his own heart anyways, arriving on Bespin. As a consequence for his mistake, he both loses his hand and his guiding inspiration. The father who he looked up to and was the shining light for him is revealed to be the very incarnation of evil he seeks to destroy. Vader presents Luke with the chance of accomplishing his goals of bringing an end to the fighting and establishing order in the galaxy, but only if he gives in to the dark side. When offered power, Luke nobly refuses, and his choice causes unrest in Vader. That moment presents the first real crack in Vader's hardened and reinforced diabolical armor, and the good man that was once Anakin is shown to still be in there. I love all of this. It builds the emotional groundwork for the finale of the trilogy. It definitively sets up who Luke and Vader are in the conflict and how the Emperor is going to be an obstacle for them both. It allows for Luke to have a shattering disillusionment and prove what kind of man he is at his core, and it humanizes Darth Vader in ways that weren't possible in the first film. Mark Hamill carries this movie and demonstrates that Luke isn't a one-dimensional hero. He can be tried and tested, and he will sometimes fail that test. But he will regain his faculties, emerge the victor, and provide hope to the galaxy. It's thanks to this movie that Darth Vader becomes a classically tragic figure. The great and noble hero that falls to darkness like Oedipus, Macbeth, or Frankenstein. We've already explored why Anakin longed for power when we did the prequel films, that it was out of fear of losing those he loved and a desire to see order brought to the galaxy. He too could not get past his emotions and ultimately fell because he believed he must be the one to proactively reach out and prevent death. He ended up causing the destruction of everything he once held dear, and he devotes himself to the dark side because in his mind, there's nothing left. After years of this mindset, encountering his best friend and then his own son sadly doesn't cause him to reconsider his stance, but rather stubbornly continuing the quest he began before. In his mind, Anakin can't conceive of a world where people don't take the opportunity to seize power for themselves in whatever form it comes across to shape their destinies. Luke's struggle against his emotions resembles his father's struggle. However, he does not desire power, and his refusal is the thing that causes Anakin to start to reconsider his life. We'll still see him aligned with the dark side and tormented in the next film, but for now, the Dark Lord may have won the physical fight, yet Luke inflicted the killing blow on Vader without raising a lightsaber. The combination of David Prowse and James Earl Jones once again delivers a memorable foe, with Jones in particular giving Vader such a humanity that belies the intense and nasty vocal performance delivered here. It may be hard to see Darth Vader as a monster ever again given everything that's come after, but it's a terrifying portrayal here, and I think the franchise has struggled to return to this standard of effectiveness with Vader ever since. Part of the brilliance of this film is that it leaves most of these ideas unspoken. It trusts its audience to piece together the bits of information given and draw whatever conclusions we want. It doesn't passively show events, it engages us and sweeps us up in its grand tale. But Luke and Vader are by no means the only provokers of thought here, oh no. Han Solo is also expanded upon from the first film. He's the smuggler who proved he had a heart underneath and would risk his life for his friends. Here, he tries resorting to placing his needs first again. A bounty hunter on Ord Mantell may be the inciting incident, and I love that we're not shown this event, but he's probably been debating about leaving for a while. Han could have left at any time in the preceding 3 years. He's never had any obligation to stay, yet he remains. Why? It may be because he's falling in love with Leia, feels a friendship with Luke, or perhaps because he really believes in the fight for freedom, more likely all three. In this film, we explore his love for Leia in a wonderfully feisty and comedic manner, and that he cares enough about Luke and Leia to give his life if need be. In other words, Han's lesson is reinforcing the choice in the first film through exploring the heart of the man who made that choice. The commitment to the fight for freedom will be tackled in the next film, but for now, we know that Han's true place is not amongst the rogues and lowlife. He's a natural-born leader that can do more good here. Lando Calrissian is meant to be a cautionary tale for Han and is held up as a mirror. He seems to be what Han is heading towards becoming, a responsible leader and a gentleman. He does care for a cause greater than himself now. However, he lets his current mundane responsibilities blind him to the real fight. He seems like someone who would like to focus on his own little world just like Han. However, his encounter with Vader, a man possessed with an obsession towards his own goals, shakes him to his core and makes him regret that thinking working with evil is the reasonable option. The end lesson for him is the same as Han's. This fight is too important, and he cannot fully become the good man he professes to be unless he joins the rebels. Whatever else Billy D. Williams has done in film, this is the role people will most associate him with. And it's not just because this franchise is amongst the most popular in history. It's because he only appears in the third act and yet makes a huge impression. He turns what could have been a throwaway side character into someone who is as fundamental to people's memories of the original trilogy as Han, Luke, or Leia. Bravo! Leia continues to be a force of a character thanks to Carrie Fisher's performance. Unfortunately, this is where some of the cracks in the original trilogy start to show for me. As much as I want to love Leia as I do some of the others, I think her best role is in the original film, where she subverts the damsel in distress cliché and is a leader for the rebellion. Here she continues that leadership angle, but her principal duty is to serve as the love interest for Han. She doesn't really get an arc of her own beyond coming around on Han, which is a bit of a shame in hindsight. I don't mind her fulfilling this function. It's only when I look at the series overall that I realize Leia is a bunch of unfulfilled potential, particularly with the hint of her Force sensitivity at the end here. Even in the next film, she isn't given much of an independent arc and merely plays more support. So it seems like after movie 1 that Leia was always relegated to the sidelines a bit for character focus. Supposedly, the original plan for the sequel trilogy was for Episode 9 to be Leia's film, much as Episode 7 was Han's and 8 was Luke's. You could still make the argument that it is, but it's certainly not in the way we might have gotten had Carrie lived long enough, and even as is, it's a compromised presentation of that idea. Still, I count Leia as another positive and essential piece to Empire's monument of a story. With the revision during production of Episode 4 for Obi-Wan to die, Lucas found himself in need of a second mentor to continue Luke's training. This could have been a recipe for disaster, but it turned into a masterstroke. Yoda is vastly different to Obi-Wan while drawing upon the same archetypes that he did. He continues from where Kenobi left off and expands our understanding of the Force, and his size helps to illustrate his point about the Force's power. Yeah, he seems to be a pathetic thing, but such power and discipline coming from him is a powerful object lesson about how our senses can deceive us and that we must look beyond the physical. I also admire Lucas for taking a risk here and trying to create a living, breathing character out of a puppet. Operated principally and voiced by Frank Oz, I am never thinking of the Muppets or wondering about the technology involved when watching Yoda. The performance of both him and Mark Hamill make me accept the character of Yoda without question. In a similar way to Grogu from The Mandalorian, my heart warms at the idea that an inanimate object can move me to tears at times, and that I can look beyond the technological marvel and enjoy the character and performance as much as I do any of the other human characters. Lucas's philosophy in filmmaking was about pushing the boundaries, and I'm glad that that wasn't just limited to cinematography or special effects. Yoda was a breakthrough in movie puppeteering that rewrote the rules for what audiences would accept on screen. Another fabulous addition to the cast. Lucas's vision with Lawrence Kasdan's revisions is what makes the film's script sing. But like with the other movies, the more you know about the backstory and production history, the more you realize some of Lucas's statements about the series' origins, like how he took one film and split it into 3 parts, and that he had the backstory figured out a long time ago, and that it's all about the redemption of Anakin, simply isn't as clear-cut as that sounds. He did write one film initially and had Anakin playing a role, and intended the story to be like the Odyssey or Dune. We don't see much of the history, but open up at a specific point in the ongoing narrative. He then revised that film to be a smaller piece and then reused and retooled major elements left over and characters to create the subsequent films. The backstory with Anakin, Obi-Wan, and the Clone Wars each started out very differently to what we ended up getting. And like Episode 4, this film was made under those conditions. Episode 4 was operating under a presumption that Anakin and Vader were 2 different people, though it still works quite well with this retcon. Episode 5 was made with the assumption that there would be at least 7 more films, with the other mentioned by Yoda being Luke's sister, importantly not Leia, who would have been fleshed out in the sequel trilogy, and the Emperor not being a real presence on screen until after Vader's death in Episode 6, with his own demise coming in Episode 9. The fallout from this film's release changed Lucas's mind on this plan, but I'll tackle that when we get to Episode 6. Episode 5's story, at least the bulk of it, wasn't conceived until well after Episode 4's release. But like a good improviser, Lucas took what came before, both good and bad, and ran with it. All the production departments did the same as well. Kirshner's direction avoids some of the features that Lucas had with the original. Clunkiness of the dialogue and its stilted delivery, rather rudimentary staging of shots, and fast pace that doesn't allow for much breathing room. Those features made that film feel more like an earnest and sincere adventure piece delivered in an off-the-cuff, more documentarian style. Here, Kirshner goes for broader theatrical presentation and more intimate emotions. There's a lot more subtlety in the performances, with characters just sometimes acting via facial expressions. Yes, even the puppet, droids, and masked villain get some parts. This allows for the vocal silence to give way to the visual sound and music to deliver the themes of the piece without exposition. Note how the camera is tilted in the scene with Han and Leia just before going to Bespin, how the frame rate slows down for the Dagobah vision with Darth Vader, and how the telepathic communication between Vader and Luke is shown. It's both breaking from what Lucas did and also evolving in the places that best suit the goals of this movement of the Star Wars Symphony. Of course, the other production departments do stellar work. Ben Burtt continues creating iconic sounds and immersive sonic landscapes. Norman Reynolds continues wonderfully from John Barry's stellar production design for the first film. John Williams provides us with what is perhaps his best score of the original trilogy. Standout new themes include the theme for Darth Vader and the Empire, Yoda, Han and Leia's romance, Cloud City, and both the Hoth battle and the asteroid chase. The latter of these John Powell would borrow from for his score to Solo. The visual effects from ILM are on par with the first film. The Hoth battle is a showcase of different techniques than the Battle of Yavin, and some things like the more dynamic movements of the ships and improved rotoscoping on the lightsaber indicate some substantial growth. Speaking of the lightsabers, I'm glad to see that the crew realized getting the reflective light off of the sabers in camera was too much of a hassle, and reverted to just using sticks. This allows the fights to become faster and allow for more movement. This is the first time in the series we see combatants use the Force against each other, and it added a whole new dimension to the series' action. In terms of what I don't like about the film, it's pretty much nitpicks, except for my last observation. This score is pretty close to divine, but upon listening to it in isolation, I'd say perhaps the first half uses the Imperial March more than it should. Seriously, count how many times it's used, and if you made a drinking game out of it, you'd be wasted before we got off of Hoth. I also think 3PO's commentary can get a bit annoying at points, but that is the idea. Plus, you forget at times that he's a droid. He feels as human as anyone else, which feeds back into the notion about the humanity within all of us. This one is insanely minor to me, but how did Han not see Boba following him on his sensors? If the Falcon is too small for a cloaking device, surely Slave One is too. And if Boba is jamming sensors, surely Han would take that as a sign something's up. Regarding the special edition, I'm indifferent about seeing the Wampa, but I also like the design. The extended Vader scene with him returning to the Executor is wholly unnecessary, and they even use a new angle of the opening scene from the next film to fill a gap. It's not all bad. I especially appreciate cleaning up some of the effects without changing them drastically, such as solidifying the outline of the cockpit of the speeders on Hoth, and adding in new backgrounds for Cloud City. But there's a major change that bugs me, and it's the Emperor's scene. It's not the obvious change. I actually approve of putting in Ian McDiarmid here, if only for continuity's sake. It's the new spoken lines. Palpatine confirms Luke is the offspring of Anakin. Vader asks how this is possible, and Palpatine tells him to search his feelings and that he'll know it to be true. First off, Vader already knew Luke's last name. He used it earlier in the film, and I don't buy that he didn't make this connection before. Second, Luke is being considered a new enemy 3 years on. If I was serving an evil overlord who told me I killed my pregnant wife and I suddenly found out I had a kid that blew up the Death Star, it'd be one of my first priorities to go to Palpatine and discuss this, particularly since I felt this kid's strong connection to the Force 3 years earlier. I guess my big issue is, why is the Emperor and Vader only now just talking about it? Palpatine and Vader are quite close, and they regularly communicate over personal matters. I guess you could make the argument that Vader didn't reveal this to the Emperor because he was planning on using Luke for his own scheme to overthrow Palpatine. Okay, but then why doesn't Palpatine punish Vader for this act of deception? I know the Code of the Sith acknowledges and encourages ambition. The apprentice must kill the master to ensure the strength of the Sith, so Palpatine shouldn't be surprised by this deception. But every Sith Lord I've seen, including Palpatine, tends to censure their apprentice for their failed takeovers. What am I missing here? On a first watch with either version, this scene works fine, as we don't yet know Vader's relationship to Luke. But once you've seen the prequels, immerse yourself a little bit in the universe, and then rewatch this, I imagine a few of us are asking some questions. Despite these few hang-ups, The Empire Strikes Back is a marvel of a sequel. It does everything a good follow-up is supposed to do: further the story, expand the universe, and provide character depth. It also does a few things that not all sequels do: go darker, be a unique piece that stands on its own, and prove that this universe is versatile enough to handle everything from simple morality plays teeming with adventure and romance to rich and slower pieces that tackle heavy themes and make you ask some personal introspective questions about life. I can understand why it's not everyone's preferred film in the series. A New Hope is amazingly efficient in effectiveness in its simplicity and tightness. Revenge of the Sith is very operatic and dares to dramatize tragic events within a series known for its generally family-friendly appeal. Rogue One provides some fantastic action and adds a gritty edge to this universe. But for me, Empire has everything I love about this series: Jedi mysticism, Rebel versus Empire battles on ground and in space, relatable and defined characters, spectacle, breathtaking visuals, and a sweeping audio experience encompassing both standout sound and music. And it's all blended together into a fantastic character-driven story that forever establishes Star Wars as a well you can draw upon for a variety of creative approaches. A New Hope may have introduced this larger world to us, but Empire guaranteed its permanent residency in pop culture. And it stands as my favorite film in this series that I love so much, and thus is one of my favorite films of all time. But the fight against the Empire and the dark side is far from over, and we'll see the culmination of this iteration of the war soon.